The gunshot that split the silence of the Wyoming prairie in 1878 did not come from an outlaw's pistol, but from the backfiring wagon of a woman who refused to let a broken axle dampen her spirits. And that sound would change everything at the ranch where no one had smiled in 3 long years. Beatrice Calloway stood beside her tilted wagon on the dusty road that cut through the endless grassland. Her hands planted firmly on her hips as she surveyed the damage with more curiosity than concern. The wheel had cracked clean through, splintering like kindling, and her medical supplies had scattered across the packed earth in a chaotic spray of bottles and bandages. At 24 years old, she had delivered 47 babies in her career as a midwife, had stitched up more wounds than she could count, and had once talked a panicked father through catching his own child when she arrived too late. A broken wagon wheel was hardly going to break her stride. "Well now, this is quite the predicament," she said aloud to her mare, a gentle gray creature named Patience who seemed to live up to her name by standing perfectly still despite the commotion. "But I suppose worse things have happened on prettier days." The Wyoming sky stretched overhead in that particular shade of blue that seemed to exist nowhere else on Earth, and the June sun beat down with enthusiasm on her bonnet. Beatrice began gathering her scattered belongings, humming a tune her mother had taught her back in Philadelphia before the fever took her. That had been 6 years ago, and Beatrice had spent the years since then moving westward, following the need for her skills from one settlement to the next. She had received word 3 weeks prior that the town of Redemption, still 2 days' journey north, desperately needed a midwife. 5 pregnant women and not a single person trained to help them bring their babies safely into the world. She was kneeling in the dirt, carefully checking each glass bottle for cracks, when she heard the thunder of hooves approaching from the west. Beatrice looked up, shading her eyes against the sun, and saw 3 riders coming fast across the open range. As they drew closer, she could make out their weathered faces and the way they sat their horses like men born to the saddle. The lead rider pulled up hard, his black stallion dancing sideways as he brought it to a halt. The man himself was tall and broad-shouldered, probably in his late 20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds. His face was all hard angles and sun-bronzed skin, and Beatrice noticed immediately that he did not smile. In fact, his expression was so carefully neutral it might have been carved from granite. "You hurt?" His voice was low and rough, like gravel underfoot. "Not a scratch on me," Beatrice said cheerfully, rising to her feet and brushing the dust from her green traveling dress. "Just a stubborn wheel that decided it had traveled far enough. I'm Beatrice Calloway, midwife, on my way to Redemption." The man's eyes flickered over her scattered supplies, taking inventory with a swift, assessing gaze. "That is 2 days' ride from here. You will not make it on foot." "I had worked that much out myself," Beatrice said, her tone warm despite his coldness. "I don't suppose you gentlemen might know where I could find assistance. A ranch, perhaps, where I might hire someone to repair my wheel." The 2 men behind the leader exchanged glances. One was older, with a grizzled beard shot through with silver, and the other was younger, barely 20, with curious eyes and a friendlier demeanor than his companions. "The Thornton Ranch is 3 miles west," the younger one offered. "That is where we are from. We have tools, and Miguel is good with woodwork." The dark-haired leader shot him a look that would have withered cactus, but the young man just shrugged. "What? We cannot just leave her here, Colt. There are wolves in these parts, and the Delaney gang passed through last week." Colt. The name suited him, Beatrice thought. Short, blunt, and dangerous. He sat his horse like a man who had been riding since before he could walk, and carried himself with the wary tension of someone expecting trouble around every corner. "The Thornton Ranch does not take visitors," Colt said flatly. "Then it is a good thing I am not visiting," Beatrice replied with unshakable good humor. "I am merely stopping by to fix a wheel. I will be on my way as soon as it is mended, and I promise not to disturb anyone's peace." Something shifted in Colt's expression at that, something almost like bitter amusement, but it vanished before Beatrice could name it. He was silent for a long moment, clearly warring with himself, before he finally gave a sharp nod. "Load what you can carry into the saddlebags. We will send someone back for the rest and the wagon." The older man climbed down from his horse without a word and began helping Beatrice gather her most essential supplies. His hands were gentle with her instruments and bottles, the hands of someone who understood the value of a person's tools. The younger man introduced himself as Billy Thornton and explained that the grizzled cowboy was called Dutch, and that Colt Thornton was his older brother and the owner of their ranch. "We do not get much company out here," Billy said as he secured a bundle of clean linens behind his saddle. "Actually, we do not get any company. Colt prefers it that way. Billy." The warning in Colt's voice was clear. "Just making conversation," Billy said, but he fell silent after that. Colt pulled his boot from the stirrup and extended his hand down to Beatrice. "You will ride with me." It was not a question or an invitation, but a simple statement of fact. Beatrice took his hand, surprised by the callous strength in his grip as he pulled her up behind him with no apparent effort. She settled herself on the horse's broad back, acutely aware of the solid warmth of Colt's body in front of her. "You will want to hold on," he said. "We ride fast." Beatrice wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the hard muscle beneath his worn shirt. She could feel the tension in him, could sense that this simple act of human contact was something he endured rather than welcomed. But his hands on the reins were steady, and when he urged the stallion forward, the horse responded with smooth power. They rode west across the rolling prairie, and Beatrice found herself watching the landscape change from grassland to something rougher and more wild. The Thornton Ranch, when it finally came into view, was larger than she expected. A sprawling two-story house built from timber and stone sat at the center of several outbuildings, including a massive barn, a bunkhouse, corrals, and what looked like a smithy. Cattle grazed in the distance, and she could see several ranch hands working near the barn. But as they rode closer, Beatrice noticed something else. The ranch was well maintained, the fences mended and the buildings solid, but there was a heaviness to the place, an absence of something she could not quite name. No dogs barked a greeting, no children played in the yard, no women hung washing on the lines. It was a working ranch, functional and efficient, but it felt hollow somehow. Silent. Colt brought his horse to a halt in front of the main house and dismounted in one fluid motion. He reached up to help Beatrice down, his hands briefly spanning her waist before he stepped back quickly, as if her proximity burned him. "Miguel," he called out, and a lean man with dark hair emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "This woman needs a wagon wheel repaired. Her rig is on the eastern road about 3 miles out. Take what you need and bring the wagon back here." Miguel nodded, his eyes curious as they took in Beatrice, but he asked no questions. Within minutes, he had gathered tools and headed out with Dutch, leaving Beatrice standing in the yard with Colt and Billy. "You can wait inside," Colt said. "Billy will show you to the kitchen. You must be hungry." He turned to walk away, clearly considering his obligation fulfilled, but Beatrice's voice stopped him. "Thank you," she said simply, "for your help. I know you said your ranch does not take visitors, and I appreciate the exception. Colt's shoulders stiffened. He did not turn around, did not acknowledge her words, just kept walking toward the barn with long, purposeful strides. Billy watched his brother go, something sad flickering across his young face. "Do not take it personally," he said quietly. "Colt has not been the same since the fever took them. None of us have, I suppose, but Colt took it the hardest." "Them?" Beatrice asked gently. "Our parents," Billy said. "And our sister Emma. She was only 17. It happened 3 years ago, right here on the ranch. The fever came through fast and mean, and by the time we realized how bad it was too late. Mama went first, then Emma 2 days later, and Papa fought for a week before his heart gave out." Colt blamed himself for not riding to town for a doctor sooner, though the doc said later there was nothing anyone could have done. Emma died in Colt's arms, and he has not been the same since. He used to laugh all the time, used to sing while he worked. Now he barely speaks unless he has to, and I have not seen him smile in 3 years. The weight of that grief settled over Beatrice like a heavy blanket. She understood loss, had seen it carve the joy out of too many people, but something about this silent ranch and its broken owner struck her deeply. "I am sorry for your loss," she said, meaning it. Billy managed a small smile. "Come on, let me get you something to eat." We may not be much for conversation these days, but we still know how to be hospitable. The kitchen was large and surprisingly clean, though it had the sparse, functional feel of a room used by men who cooked only out of necessity. Billy proved to be a competent host, serving her cold chicken, fresh bread, and strong coffee while he chattered about the ranch, clearly starved for someone new to talk to. "We run about 2,000 head of cattle," he explained, cutting thick slices of bread with more enthusiasm than skill. "Colt is the best rancher in 3 counties, even if he drives himself too hard. He is up before dawn and works until he practically falls over. Dutch says he is trying to work the grief out of his system, but I think some sorrows do not leave no matter how hard you work." Beatrice ate slowly, listening to the loneliness in Billy's voice beneath his friendly words. "And you, how do you manage?" Billy shrugged. "I stay busy, help where I can, try to remember that life is still worth living even when it hurts. Colt does not want to hear that, though. He has built walls around himself so high I do not think anyone could climb them." "Walls can be climbed," Beatrice said thoughtfully. "Or sometimes you can find a door you did not know was there." "You are an optimist," Billy observed. "I am a midwife," Beatrice corrected with a smile. "I spend my days watching new life come into the world. It is hard to be anything but hopeful when you see that miracle over and over again." They talked for over an hour, and Beatrice learned that the Thornton Ranch had been in the family for 20 years, built by Colt and Billy's father from nothing. She learned that Colt was 27 and had been running the ranch almost single-handedly since their father's death, that he had a gift with horses that bordered on uncanny, and that before the fever, he had been engaged to a woman from town who broke it off 6 months after Emma died because she could not stand his grief anymore. "Said he was already married to his sorrow," Billy said bitterly. "Just walked away when he needed someone most. That put another lock on his heart, I think." The sun was slanting toward evening when Miguel and Dutch returned with Beatrice's wagon. She went out to greet them, pleased to see that Miguel had not only repaired the wheel but had reinforced the axle and checked the rest of the rig for potential problems. "You do beautiful work," she told him sincerely. "How much do I owe you?" "Nothing," Miguel said, looking uncomfortable. "Boss said no charge." "I cannot accept that," Beatrice protested. "You spent hours on this repair." "Take it up with Colt," Dutch said gruffly. "But I will tell you now, when that man makes up his mind about something, he does not budge." Beatrice found Colt in the barn, grooming his black stallion with long, methodical strokes. He did not look up when she entered, though she knew he had heard her footsteps. "Your wagon is ready," he said to the horse. "So I understand," Beatrice replied, moving closer. "And I understand you refuse payment, which I cannot accept. You and your men put in good, honest work, and you deserve fair compensation. It is already done. Arguing will not change it." "Then let me cook you dinner," Beatrice tried. "I am quite good at it, and I noticed your kitchen looks like it could use a woman's touch." That got a reaction. Colt's hands stilled on the brush, and he finally turned to look at her. His gray eyes were hard and distant. "We do not need a woman's touch. We do fine on our own." "I meant no offense," Beatrice said calmly. "I only wanted to say thank you properly. You already said it. Consider us thanked." He turned back to the horse, clearly dismissing her. Beatrice stood there for a moment, studying his rigid back, the tension in his shoulders, the careful walls he had built around himself. She thought about Billy's words, about this man who had not smiled in 3 years, who had watched his whole family die and then shut himself away from anything that might hurt him again. "My mother died when I was 18, she said quietly. "Fever took her too, and I was training to be a midwife at the time. I knew all about sickness and healing, but I could not save her. I held her hand when she passed, and afterward, I thought I would never feel joy again. The guilt ate at me, the wondering if I had missed something, if I could have done more. It took me a long time to understand that some things are beyond our control, and that surviving when others do not is not a betrayal of their memory." Colt's hands had gone completely still now, but he did not turn around. "You do not know what you are talking about." "Maybe not," Beatrice agreed. "Everyone's grief is their own, but I do know that the people we love would not want us to stop living just because they had to." "You should go," Colt said, his voice rough, "while you still have daylight." Beatrice recognized the dismissal for what it was and did not push further. She had planted a seed, and that would have to be enough. "Thank you again for your help, Mr. Thornton. I hope our paths cross again someday." She was almost to the barn door when his voice stopped her. "The road north of here washes out when it rains. There is a storm coming tonight. You can see it building in the west. You will not make redemption before it hits." Beatrice turned back, surprised. "Are you offering me shelter for the night?" Colt finally faced her fully, and for just a moment, something human flickered in his storm-gray eyes. "The bunkhouse has an empty room. It is clean and dry. Billy will show you." It was not a warm invitation, but it was something. Beatrice smiled. "I accept. Thank you." That night, after a simple dinner that Billy cooked while chattering cheerfully about ranch life, Beatrice sat on the porch of the bunkhouse and watched the storm roll in across the prairie. The clouds built themselves into towering fortresses, and lightning forked through them like veins of silver. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and wild grass, and Beatrice felt the particular electricity that comes before a summer storm. She saw Colt emerge from the main house, checking the barn doors and securing anything that might blow away. He moved with efficient purpose, a man who had weathered countless storms and knew exactly what needed to be done. When he was satisfied that everything was secure, he started back toward the house, but his steps slowed as he passed the bunkhouse. His eyes found Beatrice sitting there in the shadows, and for a moment they just looked at each other across the darkening yard. The first drops of rain began to fall, fat and heavy, and Colt's jaw tightened. "You should go inside." "I like storms," Beatrice said. "They remind me that the world is bigger than our troubles. The world being big does not make troubles smaller." But he did not walk away. Instead, after a moment's hesitation, he climbed the 2 steps to the porch and leaned against the railing, keeping several feet of careful distance between them. They stood there in silence as the rain began in earnest, drumming on the roof and turning the yard to mud. Lightning illuminated the prairie in stark flashes, and thunder rolled across the open land like artillery fire. "Billy talks a lot," Colt said finally, not looking at her. "I imagine he told you more about this ranch than you wanted to know." "He told me you have been carrying a heavy weight," Beatrice said carefully, "but that is yours to carry or set down as you choose." "Some weights do not get set down." "No," Beatrice agreed, "but sometimes we can let others help carry them." Colt's laugh was bitter and sudden. "You have been here less than a day, and you think you have me figured out." "Not at all," Beatrice said honestly. "I think you are probably the most complicated man I have ever met, but I do know loneliness when I see it, Mr. Thornton. And I know that walls built to keep pain out also keep everything else out too. Maybe that is the point." "Maybe," Beatrice said softly, "but what a terrible way to live." Colt pushed away from the railing abruptly, his walls slamming back into place. "You should get some rest. The storm will pass by morning, and you will want to make an early start." He was gone before Beatrice could respond, disappearing into the rain and darkness like a ghost. She sat there for a while longer, listening to the storm and thinking about gray eyes filled with old pain, and a smile that had been missing for 3 years. The storm did pass by morning, leaving the world washed clean and smelling of sage and wet earth. Beatrice woke to bright sunshine streaming through the window of the small but comfortable room Billy had given her. She dressed quickly, braided her dark blonde hair, and headed to the main house, following the smell of coffee and frying bacon. She found Dutch in the kitchen, cooking breakfast with the efficiency of long practice. He grunted a greeting and pointed to the coffee pot, and Beatrice helped herself while watching him work. "Colt already out?" she asked. "Been out since before dawn," Dutch confirmed. "Checking the herd." Storm spooked them some. Billy tumbled into the kitchen a few minutes later, hair askew and eyes still heavy with sleep. He brightened when he saw Beatrice. "You are still here. I thought maybe you would sneak off at first light." "Your brother was kind enough to offer me shelter from the storm," Beatrice said. "It would be rude to leave without saying goodbye." Dutch snorted. "Colt does not do goodbyes. Then I will thank him for his hospitality when he returns." But Colt did not return for breakfast, and when Beatrice finally went to hitch up her wagon, planning to leave him a note of thanks, she found him in the barn, checking Patience's hooves with careful attention. "Your mare has a stone bruise on her left front hoof," he said without preamble. "Not serious, but she should not be pulling a wagon for a few days." Beatrice came to examine Patience herself, running her hands down the mare's leg. Colt was right. There was slight heat in the hoof, and Patience flinched slightly when Beatrice applied pressure to the tender spot. "I will go slow," Beatrice said. "We can make it to redemption if we take our time." "You will lame her," Colt said flatly, "and then you will be stuck somewhere between here and there with no horse and no help." "What do you suggest, then?" Colt straightened, his expression as unreadable as ever. "You stay here until the mare heals. 3 days, maybe 4. We have the room and you will not be in the way." Beatrice studied his face, looking for the real reason behind the offer. "You do not strike me as a man who enjoys company, Mr. Thornton. Why are you so determined to help me?" Something shifted in his eyes, something he quickly buried. "Because I failed to get help in time once before, and people I loved died because of it. I will not make that mistake again, even for a stranger." The raw honesty of it caught Beatrice off guard. She understood then that this was not really about her at all. This was about Colt trying to atone for a guilt that was never his to carry in the first place. "Then I accept your offer," she said gently. "And in exchange I will make myself useful. I am an excellent cook. I can mend anything with a needle, and I have been told I am passable company when people give me a chance. You do not need to earn your keep. Perhaps not, Beatrice agreed. But I would like to anyway. Over the next 3 days, Beatrice began to understand the strange, silent rhythm of the Thornton ranch. The men rose before dawn and worked until sunset, moving cattle, mending fences, breaking horses. They spoke little, worked hard, and carried their grief like invisible brands. But slowly, carefully, Beatrice began to bring small changes to the ranch. She cooked meals that were more than just fuel, filling the kitchen with the smells of herb-roasted chicken, fresh bread, and apple pie made from the preserved fruit she found in the cellar. She mended shirts that had been torn and left unrepaired. She organized the chaotic kitchen, and she brought wildflowers in from the prairie to put on the table. Billy responded to her presence like a flower turning toward the sun, talking more freely and laughing at her stories about the various babies she had delivered and the colorful characters she had met in her travels. Dutch thawed slightly, offering the occasional grunt of approval when she got something particularly right. The other ranch hands, 5 men who lived in the bunkhouse and mostly kept to themselves, began lingering after meals to listen to her talk. But Colt remained distant, a shadow that passed through the house and barn without engaging. He was polite when their paths crossed, answering her questions with brief courtesy, but he never stayed long and never let his walls down. Beatrice caught him watching her sometimes, his gray eyes unreadable, but whenever she met his gaze, he looked away. On the 3rd evening, Beatrice was in the kitchen kneading bread dough when Billy came rushing in, his face pale. "There is a rider coming from the south," he said urgently. "Mexican woman on a lathered horse. She looks desperate." Beatrice wiped her hands on her apron and followed Billy outside. Colt was already in the yard, catching the reins of a bay mare that looked ready to collapse. The woman on its back was young, maybe 20, with terror in her dark eyes. "Please," she gasped in heavily accented English. "My sister, she has the baby coming, but something is wrong, so much blood. Please, we need help." Beatrice stepped forward immediately. "I am a midwife. Take me to her." The woman, who introduced herself as Rosa, nearly wept with relief. "Our farm is 5 miles south, but we must hurry. Maria has been laboring since yesterday and the bleeding will not stop." "My horse cannot make that ride," Beatrice said, thinking of Patience's bruised hoof. "Take Apollo," Colt said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "He is the fastest horse we have." "I will need my medical bag," Beatrice said, already moving toward the bunkhouse. "I will get it," Billy offered, running ahead. Colt was saddling the big black stallion when Beatrice returned, her skirts already dusty from her sprint. He worked with swift efficiency, checking every buckle and strap with practiced hands. "I am coming with you," he said, not looking at her. "That is not necessary. That is not a discussion." His tone left no room for argument. "If this woman is bleeding badly, you may need extra hands. And these roads are not safe for women traveling alone, especially near dark." Rosa's husband had arrived with her, and he volunteered to guide them while Rosa stayed behind to rest her exhausted horse. Within minutes, they were thundering south across the prairie, the sun already sinking toward the horizon. Beatrice had never ridden so fast in her life. Apollo moved like black lightning beneath her, and Colt rode beside her on one of the other ranch horses, his body moving in perfect rhythm with his mount. The 5 miles passed in a blur of pounding hooves and whipping wind, and when they finally reached the small farm, Beatrice could hear screaming from inside the modest house. She hit the ground running, grabbing her medical bag and racing through the door. What she found inside made her stomach clench. A young woman, probably no more than 19, lay on a blood-soaked bed, her face gray with pain and blood loss. An older woman, presumably the mother, knelt beside her, praying in rapid Spanish. Beatrice assessed the situation in seconds. The baby was breech, and Maria had been pushing against it for hours, tearing herself internally. The hemorrhaging was severe, and if Beatrice could not turn the baby and get it delivered soon, both mother and child would die. "I need clean water as much as you can boil," Beatrice said firmly, taking command of the room. "And clean sheets, towels, anything you have. You," she pointed to the mother, "I need you to stay calm and help me. Can you do that?" The woman nodded, her eyes filled with desperate hope. Beatrice scrubbed her hands and forearms until they were pink, then turned to Maria. "I am going to help you," she said in gentle but firm tones. "But I need you to trust me and do exactly what I say. Can you do that?" Maria managed a weak nod, her lips white with pain. What followed was the most difficult delivery Beatrice had ever attempted. She worked with steady, sure hands, manipulating the baby's position internally while Maria screamed. The hemorrhaging was worse than she had initially thought, and Beatrice had to work quickly, packing the wounds with clean cloth while simultaneously trying to turn the baby. Colt appeared in the doorway at one point, his face carefully blank despite the blood and chaos. "What do you need?" "More clean water," Beatrice said without looking up. "And tell Rosa to boil those herbs in my bag, the ones in the blue cloth. I need them made into a strong tea." He disappeared without question, returning minutes later with a basin of hot water. He did not flinch from the blood or the screaming, just set the water down where Beatrice could reach it and stood ready for the next order. "Talk to her," Beatrice said, jerking her head toward Maria. "In English or Spanish, I do not care. Just keep her focused on something other than the pain." Colt moved to Maria's other side, and to Beatrice's surprise, he began speaking in fluent Spanish, his voice low and steady. She could not spare the attention to translate, but whatever he was saying seemed to help. Maria's screams subsided to whimpers, and her wild eyes focused on Colt's face. It took another hour of intense work, but Beatrice finally managed to turn the baby. "Now," she said urgently, "when the next pain comes, you push with everything you have left. Do you understand?" Maria nodded weakly, her strength nearly gone. The next contraction built, and Maria pushed with a guttural cry. Beatrice guided the baby carefully, supporting the tiny body as it finally emerged into the world. A boy, small and blue and terrifyingly still. Beatrice worked with swift efficiency, clearing the baby's airways and rubbing his tiny chest vigorously. The room seemed to hold its breath, everyone frozen in terrible anticipation. And then, like a miracle, the baby coughed, sputtered, and let out a thin, indignant wail. The relief in the room was palpable. Beatrice quickly tied and cut the cord, then handed the squalling infant to the grandmother while she turned her attention back to Maria. The bleeding was still serious, but the herb tea Rosa brought helped, and Beatrice worked for another hour, stitching and packing and monitoring until she was satisfied that Maria would survive. When it was finally over, when Maria was sleeping peacefully with her baby boy tucked against her side, Beatrice stepped out of the house on shaking legs. The moon had risen, bright and full, and the prairie was bathed in silver light. She walked a few steps away from the house, her blood-stained hands trembling, and felt the weight of what had just happened settle over her. She had saved them, both of them. But it had been close, so terribly close. Strong hands gripped her shoulders from behind, steadying her. "You need to sit down before you fall down," Colt said quietly. Beatrice let him guide her to a bench beside the house. She sat heavily, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. Colt sat beside her, not touching her but close enough that she could feel his presence like an anchor. "That was the most incredible thing I have ever seen," he said after a long silence. "The way you just took control, the way you knew exactly what to do, you saved their lives." "It is what I do," Beatrice said, her voice shaking slightly. "But I am always terrified I will fail. Every single time I am terrified." "You did not fail tonight." "No," Beatrice agreed. "Not tonight." They sat there in the moonlight, two people bound by the strange intimacy of crisis survived. Inside the house, the baby began to cry, a strong, healthy sound that made Beatrice smile despite her exhaustion. "You spoke Spanish to her," Beatrice said. "I did not know you spoke Spanish." "My mother taught me," Colt said, his voice distant. "She grew up in Santa Fe, came north when she married my father. She always said it was important to speak the language of our neighbors." It was the most personal thing he had ever shared with her. Beatrice turned to look at him in the moonlight and saw that his walls had come down slightly, just enough that she could see the man beneath the grief. "What did you say to Maria?" she asked gently. "When she was so afraid." Colt was quiet for a long moment. "I told her that she was stronger than her pain, that her baby needed her to fight. And I told her that the woman helping her was a miracle worker, and that if anyone could save them both, it was you." Something warm bloomed in Beatrice's chest, spreading through her like honey. "You barely know me. I know you rode 5 miles at a dead run to help a stranger," Colt said. "I know you walked into that nightmare in there and never hesitated. I know you have a gift for bringing light into dark places." He paused, then added quietly, "And I know that you have made my brother smile more in 3 days than he has in 3 years." "What about you?" Beatrice asked softly. "Do I make you smile, Colt Thornton?" He turned to look at her then, really look at her, and Beatrice saw something shift in his gray eyes. Something old and rusty, like a door that had been locked for too long finally beginning to open. "I do not remember how," he said, and the raw honesty of it broke her heart a little. Without thinking, Beatrice reached out and took his hand. His fingers were calloused and strong, and she felt him tense at the contact, but he did not pull away. "Then maybe," she said gently, "it is time you learned again." They rode back to the ranch in the early hours of the morning, moving slowly through the moonlit prairie. Beatrice was bone-tired, swaying slightly in the saddle, and Colt finally called a halt near a creek to rest the horses and let her recover some strength. "We can camp here until dawn," he said, already unsaddling Apollo. "You need sleep." "I can make it back to the ranch," Beatrice protested, but even she could hear how unconvincing it sounded. "You are dead on your feet," Colt said bluntly. "Sleep for a few hours, I will keep watch." He had brought bedrolls, she realized, practical man that he was. He spread one near the creek for her, and Beatrice was too exhausted to argue further. She lay down fully dressed, and sleep claimed her almost instantly. She woke a few hours later to the smell of coffee and the first gray light of dawn. Colt was sitting near a small fire, watching the eastern sky lighten. He had not slept at all, she realized. Had spent the entire night keeping watch over her. "You should have woken me to take a turn," she said, sitting up and working the kinks out of her neck. "You needed the rest more than I needed the sleep." He poured coffee into a tin cup and handed it to her. "How do you feel?" "Like I wrestled a bear and lost," Beatrice admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. "But alive. How long until we reach the ranch? Hour, maybe less." Colt kicked dirt over the fire, methodically erasing all signs of their camp. "Rosa sent word ahead. I imagine the whole ranch knows what happened by now." They did indeed. When Beatrice and Colt rode into the yard, Billy came running out to meet them, his face split in a wide grin. "Rosa told us everything," he said, practically dancing with excitement. said you were a miracle worker, that you saved Maria and the baby when anyone else would have given up. The whole family wants to throw a celebration in your honor." "That is not necessary," Beatrice said, embarrassed. "Try telling them that," Billy laughed. "They already sent over a whole butchered lamb and about 100 tamales. We are having a feast tonight whether you like it or not." Beatrice looked at Colt, expecting him to shut down the idea immediately, but he just shrugged. "Billy has already invited half the county. Fighting it would be pointless." That evening, the silent ranch transformed into something Beatrice had not expected. Lanterns were strung up in the yard, tables were set up groaning under the weight of food, and people came from miles around. Maria's family arrived with gratitude shining in their eyes, the baby swaddled carefully in his mother's arms. Neighboring ranchers came with their wives and children, drawn by the news of the dramatic rescue and curious about the midwife who had accomplished it. For the first time in 3 years, the Thornton ranch was filled with music and laughter. Beatrice found herself swept up in the celebration, passed from person to person as people thanked her and shared their own birth stories. She held Maria's baby boy, who had been named Mateo, and felt the particular joy that came from knowing she had brought this little life safely into the world. But through it all, she found her eyes seeking out Colt. He stood at the edges of the celebration, watching but not participating, and Beatrice could see the struggle playing out on his face. This kind of joy, this kind of life, it was everything he had locked away after the fever took his family. Being around it clearly pained him, but he did not leave. He stayed, enduring it, and Beatrice understood that he was doing it for Billy, who glowed with happiness at having the ranch full of life again. As the evening wore on and the music started, Beatrice noticed people dancing. Billy grabbed her hand and pulled her into a reel, laughing as she tried to keep up with the fast-paced steps. She was breathless and smiling when the dance ended, and she found herself face to face with Colt. "You looked happy," he said, something unreadable in his eyes. "I am happy," Beatrice said simply. "Are you?" "I do not know," Colt said, and the confession seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. The fiddle player started a slower tune and couples began pairing off. Beatrice saw Billy dancing with one of the neighbor girls, saw Dutch actually smiling as he talked with Maria's mother. And she saw Colt standing there, his walls still up but cracking slightly, letting little slivers of light through. "Dance with me," she said impulsively, holding out her hand. "I have not danced in 3 years. Then you are overdue." For a long moment, Colt just looked at her hand like it was something dangerous. Then, slowly, he reached out and took it. His palm was rough against hers as he led her into the dance, one hand at her waist and the other clasping her fingers. They moved together in the lantern light, and Beatrice could feel the tension in his body, could sense how hard this was for him. But he did not let go. They swayed to the music, close enough that she could see the silver flecks in his gray eyes, close enough to feel the warmth of his breath. "Why are you doing this?" Colt asked quietly, his voice nearly lost in the music. "Why do you care about a broken-down rancher with more ghosts than future?" "Because you are not broken," Beatrice said firmly. "You are grieving, which is entirely different, and because when I look at you, I do not see ghosts. I see a man who is strong enough to carry the weight of a whole ranch on his shoulders, who rides through the night to help strangers, who still remembers how to be gentle even when he has forgotten how to smile." Something shifted in Colt's expression, something raw and vulnerable. "You see too much, or perhaps you hide too much." The song ended, but they stood there for a moment longer, hands still joined, eyes locked. Then someone called Beatrice's name, breaking the spell, and Colt stepped back with his walls sliding firmly back into place. "Thank you for the dance," he said formally, and then he was gone, disappearing into the shadows beyond the lantern light. The celebration went late into the night, but eventually the neighbors began to drift home, and the ranch hands stumbled off to the bunkhouse. Billy had drunk just enough beer to be cheerfully tipsy, and Dutch had to help him to bed, shaking his head with fond exasperation. Beatrice helped clean up, working alongside Rosa, who had stayed to help with the feast. They washed dishes and packed away food in comfortable silence, and when Rosa finally left with her husband, Beatrice found herself alone in the kitchen. She was putting away the last of the clean plates when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to find Colt standing in the doorway, his hair slightly mussed and his eyes uncertain. "I wanted to apologize," he said stiffly, "for leaving so abruptly earlier. That was rude." "You were overwhelmed," Beatrice said gently. "There is no need to apologize for that." Colt moved into the kitchen, his movements restless and uncertain. "This house has not had this much life in it since before the fever. It was harder than I expected, seeing people laughing and dancing where my mother used to work, where Emma used to sing while she helped with the chores. I am sure they would be glad to see it full of life again," Beatrice offered. "Would they?" Colt's voice was bitter. "Or would they be ashamed that I let myself become this hollow thing, this shadow of who I used to be?" Beatrice set down the plate she was holding and moved closer to him. "Colt, you lost your entire family in the space of a week. No one gets through that unchanged. But surviving is not the same as being hollow." "You do not understand," Colt said roughly. "Emma died in my arms, begging me to make it stop hurting, and I could not do anything. I just sat there and held her while the fever burned her up from the inside, and I could not save her. I could not save any of them. What good is all my strength, all this ranch, all the money and land and cattle if I could not protect the people I loved most?" The words poured out of him like a dam breaking, all the grief and guilt and rage he had been holding back for 3 years. Beatrice stepped forward and took his hands, gripping them tightly. "You could not save them because they were beyond saving," she said firmly. "I have seen fever like that. I know how fast it takes people, how little even trained doctors can do against it. Their deaths were not your fault, Colt, not your mother's, not your father's, and especially not Emma's. Then why does it feel like my fault?" The question was raw and broken, and Beatrice saw tears gathering in his eyes. "Why can I not let them go?" "Because you love them," Beatrice said gently. "And because grief is not something we get over. It is something we learn to carry. But you have been carrying yours alone for too long, and it has grown so heavy you can barely stand under the weight of it. I do not know how to set it down." "Then let me help you carry it," Beatrice said, "even just for a little while." Colt looked at her, really looked at her, and something in him finally broke. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her and burying his face in her shoulder. His body shook with silent sobs, 3 years of grief finally finding release, and Beatrice held him through it, her hands gentle on his back, her voice murmuring soft comfort. They stood there in the quiet kitchen for a long time, 2 people finding solace in each other's presence. And when Colt finally pulled back, his eyes were red but clearer than Beatrice had ever seen them. "I do not know what to say," he said roughly. "You do not have to say anything," Beatrice assured him. "Sometimes just feeling is enough." Colt reached up and cupped her face in his calloused hands, his thumb brushing gently across her cheekbone. "You are a remarkable woman, Beatrice Calloway." "And you," Beatrice said softly, "are a remarkable man, even if you have forgotten it." He leaned in slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away, and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was gentle and searching and full of tentative hope. Beatrice kissed him back, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, feeling his heart beating strong and steady beneath her palm. When they finally broke apart, Colt was smiling. It was small and rusty and uncertain, but it was absolutely, definitely a smile. The first one in 3 years. "There it is," Beatrice whispered, her own smile blooming across her face. "I knew you remembered how." The next morning, Beatrice woke to find her situation had changed considerably. Patience's hoof had healed enough for light travel, which meant there was no medical reason for her to stay at the ranch any longer. The women in Redemption were still waiting for her, still needed her services. But the thought of leaving the Thornton ranch, of leaving Colt, sat like a stone in her chest. She was packing her belongings slowly when Billy appeared in the doorway of her room, looking uncharacteristically serious. "You are leaving today." "I need to get to Redemption," Beatrice said, folding one of her dresses with careful precision. "I have already delayed longer than I intended." "But you will come back." Billy's voice was almost pleading. "Visit at least. This place, it has been different with you here. Better. And Colt, he is different too. Last night was the first time I have seen him truly smile since Emma died." "I know," Beatrice said softly. "He needs you," Billy said bluntly. "We all do, I suppose, but especially Colt. He has been locked away in his grief for so long, and you are the only person who has managed to find a way through his walls. Billy, I cannot stay just because your brother needs someone to help him heal. That is not fair to anyone." "I am not asking you to stay for Colt," Billy said. "I am asking you to stay for yourself, because unless I am very much mistaken, you care about him too." Beatrice sat down on the edge of the bed, her half-packed bag forgotten. "What I feel does not matter. I have a responsibility to the women in Redemption. They need me." "Redemption is 2 days' ride from here," Billy pointed out. "You could visit them regularly, help with the births when they come, and still make this your home base. We have plenty of room, and heaven knows this ranch could use a woman's touch on a permanent basis." "You are asking me to upend my entire life on the chance that what I feel for your brother might be real." "I am asking you to give yourself a chance at happiness," Billy corrected. "And to give Colt the same chance. You are good for each other. Anyone with eyes can see that." Before Beatrice could respond, Colt himself appeared behind Billy, his expression carefully neutral. "Let her make her own choice, Billy. She does not owe us anything." Billy looked between them, sighed heavily, and left them alone. Colt stepped into the small room, suddenly making it feel much smaller. "You are leaving," he said. "It was not a question." "I have to," Beatrice said. "The women in Redemption need me, I know." Colt was quiet for a moment, then said, "Billy is right, though. You could base yourself here and travel to Redemption when needed. We have the space, and it would solve your problem of not having a permanent home." "Is that what you want?" Beatrice asked carefully. "Or is that what Billy wants?" Colt moved to the window, looking out over the prairie. "A week ago, I would have said I did not want anything. That I was content to just exist, to work the ranch and avoid feeling anything ever again. But then you arrived with your broken wagon wheel and your stubborn optimism, and you made me remember what it felt like to be human." He turned to face her, and Beatrice saw vulnerability in his eyes. "I do not know if I can be what you need. I am damaged goods, Beatrice. 3 years of grief do not just disappear because a beautiful woman makes me smile. I might never be the man I was before the fever." "I do not want the man you were before," Beatrice said, standing and moving to him. "I want the man you are now, grief and all, scars and all. I want the man who rides through the night to help strangers, who speaks Spanish to terrified mothers, who finally let himself feel something after locking it all away for so long. You barely know me." "Then let me get to know you better," Beatrice said. "Let me stay, Colt." "Not because Billy asked, and not because you need help healing, but because I want to. Because when I think about leaving here, about never seeing you again, It feels like tearing away a piece of myself I did not even know I had." Colt closed the distance between them, his hands coming up to frame her face. "You make me want to try," he said quietly. "To be better, to feel again, to build something instead of just surviving. That terrifies me." "Being terrified means you still care," Beatrice said. "It means you are alive." "Stay," Colt said, and it was both a request and a plea. "Please stay." Beatrice kissed him, pouring all her answer into the press of her lips against his. When they broke apart, she was smiling. "I will stay. But I will need to make trips to Redemption regularly. Those women still need a midwife." "I will take you myself," Colt promised. "Whenever you need to go." Over the next few weeks, Beatrice settled into life at the Thornton Ranch in a way that felt both natural and extraordinary. She converted one of the unused rooms in the main house into a proper medical office, stocking it with her supplies and equipment. She made the trip to Redemption and met with the pregnant women there, setting up a schedule for regular visits and making sure each woman knew how to reach her in an emergency. The ranch itself began to change under her influence. Small touches at first: curtains in the windows, fresh flowers on the table, the smell of baking bread filling the house. But deeper changes too. The men began talking more freely over dinner, sharing stories and laughter instead of eating in silence. Billy's natural cheerfulness returned in full force, and even Dutch began to smile occasionally. But the biggest change was in Colt himself. He was still serious, still carried the weight of his responsibilities with quiet determination, but the walls around his heart were coming down brick by brick. He started smiling more, not just at Beatrice, but at his brother, his men, even the horses. He began talking about the future instead of just surviving the present, making plans for expanding the herd, for improving the house, for building something lasting. And every evening, after the work was done and the ranch had settled into twilight quiet, Colt would find Beatrice. Sometimes they sat on the porch and watched the stars emerge. Sometimes they walked along the creek that ran through the property. Sometimes they just talked, sharing their histories and dreams and fears. Colt told her about his childhood, about his mother's laugh and his father's wisdom and Emma's terrible singing voice that she had loved anyway. Beatrice told him about growing up in Philadelphia, about learning to be a midwife from a woman who had delivered half the city, about the grief of losing her mother, and the freedom she had found in traveling west. They fell in love slowly and completely, in the way of two people who had both known loss and understood the preciousness of finding something worth keeping. 2 months after Beatrice's arrival, she made her third trip to Redemption to attend a birth. Colt rode with her as promised, and they stayed at the small boarding house while Beatrice helped a nervous first-time mother bring a healthy baby girl into the world. The delivery was straightforward and without complications, and afterward, Colt and Beatrice walked through the dusty streets of Redemption, enjoying the novelty of being in town. They were passing the general store when a woman's voice called out, sharp and cold, "Colt Thornton." "I did not expect to see you in town again." Colt froze, and Beatrice felt his whole body tense. She turned to see a woman approaching them, beautiful in a hard kind of way, with ice-blue eyes and a mouth set in a cruel line. "Rebecca," Colt said, his voice carefully neutral. This, Beatrice realized, was the woman who had broken their engagement, the one who had walked away when Colt needed her most. "I heard you had taken up with some traveling woman," Rebecca said, her eyes raking over Beatrice with obvious disdain. "A midwife of all things. How utterly common." "Careful," Colt said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "You do not want to finish that sentence." "Why not? Someone should tell her the truth about you, about how you are so eaten up with grief you can barely function." How you spent 6 months after I left barely speaking, barely eating, just working yourself into the ground like you could somehow punish yourself back to life." "That is enough," Colt said sharply, but Rebecca was not done. "She should know what she is getting into, that you are broken, Colt. That you will never really love her because you are too busy loving ghosts." Beatrice had heard enough. She stepped forward, placing herself between Colt and Rebecca. "You are wrong," she said calmly. "About all of it, Colt is not broken. He is strong and kind and brave enough to feel his grief instead of running from it. And he loves more deeply than anyone I have ever met, which is exactly why his family's loss hurt him so badly." "You have known him for what, 2 months?" Rebecca sneered. "I knew him for 2 years, and I can tell you that man is a shell of who he used to be." "You knew who he used to be," Beatrice corrected. "I know who he is now, and I would choose the man standing beside me over whoever he was before any day of the week." Rebecca's face flushed with anger. "You will regret this, tying yourself to a man who will never truly be whole again." "The only thing I regret," Beatrice said firmly, "is wasting time talking to someone who was foolish enough to walk away from the best man I have ever known." She took Colt's hand and led him away, leaving Rebecca standing in the street with her mouth hanging open. They did not speak until they were out of town, riding back toward the ranch under the vast Wyoming sky. "Thank you," Colt said finally, "for defending me, though you did not have to." "Yes, I did," Beatrice said. "Because everything I said was true. You are not broken, Colt. You never were." Colt pulled his horse to a stop and dismounted, helping Beatrice down from Patience. They stood there in the middle of the prairie, surrounded by nothing but grass and sky and wind. "I love you," Colt said, the words simple and raw and completely sincere. "I did not think I would ever feel this way again, did not think I deserved to, but I love you, Beatrice. The way you laugh, the way you bring joy into every room you enter, the way you see the best in people even when they cannot see it themselves. I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life showing you how much." Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears. "I love you too," she said. "I think I have since the moment you pulled me up onto your horse with that scowl on your face, trying so hard not to care and failing completely." Colt kissed her then, deep and thorough and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "I bought this in redemption," he said, opening it to reveal a simple gold band with a small ruby set in it. "It is not fancy, but it belonged to my grandmother, and my mother gave it to me years ago, said I should give it to the woman I wanted to spend my life with." He took a breath. "Marry me, Beatrice. Be my wife, build a life with me here on this ranch. I know I am asking a lot, asking you to tie yourself to a man with more baggage than sense sometimes, but I swear I will spend every day trying to make you happy." "Yes," Beatrice said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, of course, yes." Colt slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, like it had been waiting for her all along. They stood there in the prairie grass, holding each other and grinning like fools, while the wind sang around them and the sun painted the sky in shades of gold. They were married a month later in a simple ceremony at the ranch, with Billy as best man and Maria as Beatrice's attendant. The whole county turned out for the celebration, filling the ranch with music and laughter and joy. Dutch actually cried during the ceremony, though he denied it afterward, and Billy gave a rambling, heartfelt toast that had everyone laughing and dabbing at their eyes. But the moment Beatrice remembered most was when Colt looked at her as they exchanged vows, his eyes shining with love and hope, and the kind of happiness she had never thought to see in him. When he kissed her after they were pronounced husband and wife, she heard him whisper against her lips, Thank you for teaching me to smile again." Their life together unfolded with the kind of steady joy that comes from two people who have both known loss and choose love anyway. Beatrice continued her work as a midwife, traveling to Redemption and the surrounding farms whenever she was needed, and Colt always made sure she had whatever she required to do her job well. He built her a larger medical office, stocked with the best equipment he could find, and never complained about the late-night calls or the days she spent away helping women bring their babies safely into the world. The ranch prospered under their joint stewardship. Colt's natural skill with cattle and horses combined with Beatrice's organizational talents and head for numbers made them a formidable team. They expanded the herd, built new outbuildings, and hired more hands as the ranch grew. But more than that, they built a home, a place filled with warmth and laughter, where people were welcome and joy was cultivated as carefully as any crop. Billy married the neighbor girl he had danced with at that first celebration, a sweet-natured woman named Sarah who proved to be as good a match for him as Beatrice was for Colt. They built a house on the far edge of the ranch property, and Billy took on more responsibility for the day-to-day operations, freeing Colt up to spend more time with Beatrice and to finally allow himself to enjoy the life he was building instead of just enduring it. A year and a half after their wedding, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant. The joy on Colt's face when she told him was something she would treasure forever. He was attentive to the point of being overprotective, constantly worrying about her health and insisting she rest more than she probably needed to. But Beatrice understood that his concern came from a place of love and old fear, so she let him fuss and enjoyed his devotion. She continued her work until she was 7 months along, at which point even she had to admit that climbing in and out of wagons to attend births was becoming impractical. She turned her attention to training 2 younger women in Redemption who had expressed interest in learning midwifery, passing on her knowledge and skills to the next generation. When her time came, it was Maria who attended her, returning the favor from that desperate night 2 years before. Beatrice labored through a long afternoon and into the evening, with Colt pacing holes in the floor downstairs and Billy trying unsuccessfully to calm him down. The baby finally arrived just after midnight, a boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes. Colt was allowed up almost immediately, and the look on his face when Maria placed his son in his arms was something beyond words. He held the tiny, squalling bundle with infinite gentleness, tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," Colt whispered, looking from the baby to Beatrice with wonder. "You are both perfect." They named him Thomas after Colt's father, and he proved to be a healthy, happy baby with a good appetite and an early talent for sleeping through the night. Colt was a devoted father, comfortable with the baby in a way that surprised everyone but Beatrice. She had known from watching him with the animals, from seeing his gentleness with frightened horses and newborn calves, that he would be wonderful with children. Life settled into a new rhythm, one that revolved around feeding schedules and diaper changes, and the particular joy that comes from watching a new life grow and thrive. Beatrice eventually returned to her midwife work, taking Thomas with her when he was old enough and arranging care with Maria or Sarah when he was not. 2 years later, they had a daughter, a tiny thing with Beatrice's blonde hair and Colt's gray eyes. They named her Emma after Colt's sister, and Beatrice watched her husband hold his daughter and finally, truly make peace with his past. The grief did not disappear, would never completely disappear, but it no longer ruled him. He could remember his first Emma with love instead of just pain, could honor her memory by giving her name to this new life, instead of locking it away in the darkness. The years passed in a cascade of moments both ordinary and extraordinary. First steps and first words, scraped knees and childhood illnesses, birthdays and Christmases and the steady turning of the seasons. The ranch continued to grow and prosper, becoming one of the most successful operations in the territory. But more than that, it became a place of welcome, where people knew they could come for help and would find it. Beatrice became known throughout the county as a miracle worker, the midwife who had never lost a mother or child, though she always insisted it was skill and preparation rather than miracles. She trained a dozen young women over the years, passing on her knowledge freely, and taking pride in watching them become skilled practitioners in their own right. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Colt took Beatrice back to the spot on the prairie where he had proposed. They rode out at dawn, leaving the children with Billy and Sarah, and watched the sun come up over the endless grassland. "You ever regret it?" Colt asked, his arm around her shoulders as they sat in the grass. "Giving up your traveling life to settle here with me?" "Never," Beatrice said firmly. "Not once. This is where I was always meant to be, with you building this life, raising our children, making a difference in whatever way I can." "You have made more than a difference," Colt said. "You saved me, Beatrice. I was drowning in grief and guilt, and you threw me a lifeline. You reminded me that it was okay to live, to be happy, to love again. You gave me back my life." "We saved each other," Beatrice corrected. "You gave me a home, a family, a purpose beyond just moving from place to place. You showed me what it means to build something lasting, to put down roots and watch them grow deep and strong." Colt kissed her temple, a gesture of affection that had become as natural as breathing over the years. "I never thought I would smile again after Emma died. And then you arrived with your broken wagon wheel and your stubborn joy, and you made me remember how. That first smile felt like breaking through stone, like coming back to life after being dead for 3 years." "I remember," Beatrice said softly. "I remember thinking that you had the most beautiful smile I had ever seen, even rusty and uncertain as it was." They sat there as the sun climbed higher, two people who had found each other in the midst of loss and built something beautiful together. The ranch spread out below them, thriving and full of life, a testament to hard work and love and the choice to keep going even when everything felt impossible. Years continued to pass in their steady, precious way. Thomas grew into a serious boy with his father's quiet strength and his mother's compassion, eventually taking to ranching with natural skill. Emma proved to be as stubborn and joyful as her mother, with a talent for healing that suggested she might follow in Beatrice's footsteps. They had one more child, a surprise baby when Beatrice was 38, a boy they named William after Billy, who had become a beloved uncle and trusted partner in running the ranch. Colt's hair started to go silver at the temples, and Beatrice found laugh lines around her eyes, but they wore their age well, comfortable in their skin and in the life they had built. The ranch became something of an institution, known for its quality cattle and its open-door policy for anyone in need. On quiet evenings, when the children were finally asleep and the ranch work was done, Colt and Beatrice would sit on the porch and watch the stars emerge over the prairie. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, but always Colt held her hand, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on her wrist. "I love you," he would say, the words as fresh and sincere as the first time he had spoken them. "I love you too," Beatrice would reply, leaning into his warmth and strength. And every time he smiled at her, even after all these years, Beatrice remembered that moment when a joyful midwife had arrived at a silent ranch, and a hardened cowboy had smiled for the first time in 3 years, and everything had changed. That moment had been the beginning of something extraordinary, the first crack in the walls around a grieving heart, the first step on a journey that had led to this. A life full of love and laughter, purpose and peace, roots that went deep and branches that reached for the sky. They grew old together on that ranch, surrounded by children and grandchildren, by the cattle that dotted the hills and the horses in the corral, by the endless prairie sky and the land they had worked and loved and made their own. And when people asked Colt about his life, about how he had survived the loss of his first family and built something so beautiful in the aftermath, he always said the same thing. "I learned to smile again," he would say, looking at his wife with eyes still full of love after all these years. "And once I remembered how to do that, everything else followed." Beatrice would smile back at him, the smile that had brought light into his darkness all those years ago, the smile that had never dimmed or faded even through the challenges and sorrows that life inevitably brought. And in that smile was all the joy and hope and stubborn optimism that had saved them both, that had transformed a silent ranch into a home full of life, that had proven love was always worth the risk of grief, because the alternative was not living at all. Their story became something of a legend in that part of Wyoming, the tale of the midwife who brought more than just babies into the world, who delivered hope and healing wherever she went, and the cowboy who learned to live again after believing he was already dead. People told it around fires and at gatherings, embellishing and romanticizing, but the heart of it remained true. Sometimes the most profound healing comes not from medicine or time but from the simple choice to open your heart again, to let someone in past all your defenses, to risk the possibility of joy even when you have known the depths of sorrow. And every birth Beatrice attended, every healthy baby she placed in grateful parents' arms, every mother she guided safely through the dangerous passage of bringing new life into the world, she carried with her the knowledge that her own greatest delivery had been that of Colt Thornton's smile, returned to him after 3 years of darkness. That single moment had changed everything, had set them both on a path that led to more happiness than either had dreamed possible. As Beatrice moved into her 60s and finally began to slow down, she trained Emma to take over most of her midwife duties, passing on not just the technical skills but the philosophy that had guided her work. That every life is precious, that women deserve support and respect during the vulnerable process of childbirth, that sometimes the greatest medicine is simply being present with compassion and steady hands. Emma proved to be even more talented than her mother, with an intuitive understanding of birth complications that saved many lives over the years. She married a doctor from Redemption, and together they built a small clinic that served the surrounding area, bringing modern medicine and traditional midwifery together in a way that honored both. Thomas took over running the ranch when Colt was ready to step back, proving to be as skilled and dedicated as his father. He married a rancher's daughter from the next county over, and they added sheep to the operation, diversifying in a way that helped the ranch weather the economic ups and downs that came with the changing times. Young William proved to have a talent for horses that rivaled his father's, and he built a reputation as one of the finest horse trainers in Wyoming, selling quality stock to ranches and cavalry posts all over the territory and later the state. Colt and Beatrice lived to see their grandchildren grow, to watch the ranch expand and evolve, to witness Wyoming achieve statehood in 1890 and all the changes that came with the closing of the frontier era. They lived to celebrate 50 years of marriage, surrounded by 3 generations of family in the same house where Colt had once lived in silent grief, where Beatrice had first brought the light of her joy and helped him remember how to smile. On their 50th anniversary, when they were both in their 70s but still sharp and engaged with life, Billy raised a toast at the celebration. "To my brother and his beautiful wife," he said, his own hair now completely white. 50 years ago, a woman with a broken wagon wheel and an unbreakable spirit arrived at this ranch and changed everything. She taught us all that grief does not have to be the end of the story, that love is always worth the risk, and that sometimes the greatest adventures come from choosing to stay rather than moving on. Colt, Beatrice, you have built something extraordinary here, not just in land and cattle, but in the love and family that fills this place. May you have many more years together. The gathering raised their glasses, and Colt stood to respond. He was still tall and straight despite his years, and when he looked at Beatrice, his eyes held the same love they had from the beginning. 50 years ago I was a man without hope, he said simply. I had lost everything that mattered to me, and I was just going through the motions of living without actually being alive. And then a woman showed up with a busted wagon wheel and a smile that could light up the darkest night, and she refused to let me stay dead. She loved me back to life, and every day since then has been a gift I never thought I would receive. Beatrice, you are the best thing that ever happened to me, and I thank God for broken wagon wheels and stubborn midwives who do not know when to give up on people. Beatrice stood and kissed him, to the cheers and applause of their family, and whispered in his ear, I never gave up on you because I saw who you really were, even when you could not see it yourself, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat. They lived several more good years after that. Years of watching sunrises from the porch and playing with great-grandchildren. Years of quiet contentment and the deep satisfaction that comes from a life well lived. They went together in the end, within days of each other, both peacefully in their sleep in the big bedroom they had shared for more than 50 years. It was as if neither could bear to continue without the other, as if the love that had bound them together in life held strong enough to carry them together into whatever came next. The ranch continued on after them, passed down through the generations, but always carrying the mark of what Colt and Beatrice had built together. The main house remained a place of welcome, where people knew they could come for help and would find it. Emma's daughter and granddaughter followed in the family tradition of midwifery, continuing the legacy of skill and compassion that Beatrice had started. And on quiet evenings, when the work was done and the prairie sky was full of stars, the descendants of Colt and Beatrice Thornton would sit on that same porch and tell the story of how it all began. How a joyful midwife with a broken wagon wheel had arrived at a silent ranch, and how a hardened cowboy, locked away in grief and guilt, had smiled for the first time in 3 years, and how that single moment of returned joy had blossomed into something beautiful and lasting. A love story written across decades and generations, a testament to the healing power of hope and the transformative nature of love chosen even in the midst of sorrow. The story became a family treasure, passed down carefully from parents to children, embroidered and embellished but always holding true to the essential truth at its core. That love is worth the risk, that grief does not have to be the end, that sometimes the most broken people can build the most beautiful lives, and that a single smile, genuine and hard-won, can be the beginning of everything.